Hey everyone, factoring into the second update for the spring of 2016. So we did the first update at the end of December during the Christmas week. I think it was the 27th of December. We actually released the first spring update. And it's a bit of a mixed bag, that one, but it basically showed quite an unsettled pattern for the spring. No signal for anything particularly cold or very mild, but precipitation was generally signalled to be above average. And the overall idea was a fairly cool spring as well from the pattern that was suggested. So cool, but not particularly cold, and quite an unsettled spring was the general consensus, I think, from the first update. We'll have a look at the long-range seasonal models for this second update for the spring of 2016 in a second. Just say we're short of the Russian model. That hasn't updated this month for some reason, so we haven't got the Russian model with us. We've got all the other models though, so we've got 10 of them. The first couple will only be covering the February to April period, not the full spring period, but the rest of the models will cover the full spring period. So I'll get on with it in a second, but before I get on with that, just to say about the ads at GasLab. So it's links articles on all the pages. Have a browse through the widgets and click through the links if there's any articles that you're interested in. Thanks so much for doing that. There's also video ads on most of the pages. Overnight with content, you watch them, they'll close back up again. And it is helping to pay for GasWorthies.com. Just so you can find the link to most of the links to most of these long-range seasonal models on the links page. So if you want to see most of these models, you certainly are able to do that. And just to say, enjoy the video. It's going to be quite a long one, so you'll need a comfy chair and maybe a cup of tea, or something a bit stronger perhaps, depending on what time of the day you're viewing. So get a comfy chair, get a drink, and I hope you enjoy the second spring update. So you're going to start off with the APEC model. Now this is a experimental model. It's a collaboration of Met agencies from the Southern Hemisphere. So I think the Bureau of Meteorology in Australia is in with this. I think the Korean, South Korean Met Agency is in with this. I think the JMA has a role in this as well. So it's several Southern Hemisphere Met agencies coming together to produce this experimental model. This is the 500 millibar height anomaly for February to April. Rather a strange one. As you know, 500 millibar heights, red typically extrapolates to high pressure and blue to low pressure. This is rather an odd looking chart. We've got signs of ridging to the north of the country, fairly weak pressure down to the south, although it's not a trough, so you will think this is a fairly coolish pattern, actually, perhaps with a southerly tracking jet stream, but there's not really enough to go on there to be able to say that, I don't think. Generally, it could perhaps just be high pressure sitting around much of northern and Western Europe, perhaps. But as that's rather an odd looking chart, maybe we can get more from the temperature and precipitation anomalies for February to April. So this is a temperature anomaly, and we're coming out a little bit above average. Not a especially warm February to April by any means, but a little bit above average with those temperatures. And the precipitation for February to April, that's coming out a little bit wetter than average. So I think perhaps got signs of a bit of a southerly tracking jet stream here. Maybe a bit of ridging with these dry and average anomalies out in the northern Atlantic. But there's not a great deal to go on there, but I think the overall signal from APEC is perhaps near normal temperature to a bit above average and a bit wetter than average as well. The JMA, the Japanese model, is again going to be covering the February to April period, not the full spring period with this one. So what we find in terms of 500 millibar heights for February to April is that we've got a ridge down to the southwest and out into the middle part of the Atlantic with a trough of low pressure to the north and the jet stream coming through the country, something like that. It means that the temperatures are coming out a little bit milder than average again. So we've got a little bit of a signal here from the JMA and also from APEC for a slightly milder than average February to April, perhaps, with the rainfall coming out above average. You would expect that because the jet stream is coming right through the country. So both of these models are in agreement actually for the pattern from February to April, which is a bit milder than average. average, with rainfall above average. In terms of the wind direction, generally it's been signalled to be westerly. Not sure if you can quite make out the wind arrows there, but generally it's a westerly signal from those wind arrows. Right, the rest of the models we look at are going to be covering the full spring period going from March to May. So we've got the Brazilian model here next. So these are 500 millibar heights. This is always a bit different to all the other height anomaly charts that we use. So blue is extrapolating to high pressure and red extrapolates to low pressure. On any other 500 millibar height anomaly, that would be the other way round. But this one just does it, try and catch us out, I think. So for the anomaly in terms of 500 millibar heights for the spring, we see got a trough of low pressure here in the central part of the Atlantic, and maybe some sort of a ridge up to the north and the northeast. So this could be a bit of a battleground UK scenario with the jet stream doing something a little bit like that. It means that we've got westerlies trying to come in from the Atlantic, but no doubt got easterlies and northeasterlies trying to come in around that ridging. So that could be quite an interesting scenario actually for the spring. If this occurs early on, it could be quite cold, particularly to the north and the east of the country. Later on, it probably just means it's pretty dismal on the eastern side, and probably quite unsettled as well. But that's quite an interesting one from the Brazilian model. However, the temperature anomalies, as you often find with these long-range anomalies, temperature anomaly coming out milder than average, and in terms of the rainfall and non-precipitation anomaly, that comes out near normal. No real signal there for precipitation from the Brazilian model. Next one is Hugues van der Doel. This is covering the full spring period, and this is always a bit different because what Hugues does is analog based forecasting based on sea surface temperature anomalies. So Hugues last month in December 2015 looked at the sea surface temperature anomalies across the whole of the world, and then from that he compared back to past years with a similar sea surface temperature anomaly to create a forecast going forward. This is the 500 millibar height anomaly for the spring from Hugues van der Doel's model, and he's predicting a lot of high pressure, a lot of ridging there in across the country, also in across Scandinavia as well. So a very settled spring coming up if Hugues van der Doel is right. And Hugues works within the umbrella of NOAA and the United States meteorological agencies. The temperature anomaly from Hugues van der Doel comes out milder than average in most salmon pink. So clear signal here across all the models that looked at so far and Hugues analogues for a milder than average spring. And in terms of the temperature anomaly, the rainfall anomaly, I should say, precipitation anomaly, that's coming out a little bit drier than average. Well, near normal for most of us, a little bit drier than average just to the north. But I think overall the precipitation anomaly is probably about average from Hugues van der Doel. But we've got a very clear signal here from all models and Hugues analogues for a milder than average spring. NASA next is the experimental model from NASA. Now, we don't have the 500 millibar height anomaly, unfortunately, for the spring from NASA. We have got temperatures and precipitation. Look at this, same story for temperatures. We're coming out above average there, as is most of Europe as well. So a mild spring being signalled from NASA, and the rainfall, quite interesting, that's coming out a little bit above average, so not a great deal in it, but in those slight yellow colours there, indicating just a little bit above average with the precipitation, with the rainfall this spring, but a milder than average signal definitely for those temperatures. CFS V2 next. This is the 700 millibar height anomaly from the CFS V2. This was indicated quite unsettled spring, so in complete contrast probably with what NASA is showing, although we haven't got the 500 millibar heights, interestingly, from NASA, but it's in contrast to what Hugues van der Doel is showing anyway. This actually has a trough of low pressure close to the country, and the jet stream is probably running in something like that, so it's almost to the south of the country, I think, the jet stream. You wouldn't expect a particularly mild spring, and if you have a look at the temperature anomaly, actually there's not really a warm spring being seen. It's actually coming out near normal with that temperature anomaly this spring. Rainfall comes out above average, so wetter than average spring with near normal temperatures, and the jet stream probably doing something a bit like that. We're just about on the cool side of the jet there, and quite an unsettled and not particularly mild signal for the spring. We'll carry on with the North American models, and we'll have a look at CAN-SIPS next. So this is the 500 millibar height anomaly from CAN-SIPS for March. These are monthly figures. I've just got to stop and have a quick drink of water. Sorry about that. So this is the 500 millibar height anomaly from the CAN-SIPS model for the coming March 1st. And again, we've got red extrapolating to high pressure, with blue extrapolating to low pressure. So what we see for March is that we've got a trough of low pressure to the south, and we've got some ridging up to the north. You expect this to be a fairly coolish looking pattern, actually, with the flow potentially doing something a bit like that. Let's see what April does. And for April, it all becomes much weaker, but the idea for April is that we've got a bit of a ridge in the central part of the Atlantic with a trough of low pressure generally down south. That could be quite a coolish signal again for April. And then we go through to May. And this looks quite unsettled with a trough of low pressure more or less centred over the top of the country. So how do the temperatures stack up on a month-by-month basis? Well, for March, we're looking at near normal to a little bit above average, which is quite a surprise because that chart, the anomaly chart, looks actually fairly cold for March in terms of the sea level pressure. But anyway, the temperature's coming out near normal to a bit above average. For April, though, it does go colder than average, a cool signal there for April. Most of Europe looking quite cold as well. And then we go through to May, and despite the fact that a trough appears to be over top of the country, May actually comes out quite warm with above average temperatures going on there. So very different months from March to April to May, all of them looking a bit different in terms of the pattern and in terms of the temperatures. Rainfall, precipitation for March is coming out below average, a drier than average March being signalled there. Actually, I think we're looking still at temperatures there, so there's some precipitation, sorry about that. So I wasn't sure what was going on there, and we appear to have gone through to June. So there we go, we're up to date with things now. Sorry about that. So precipitation for March is coming out. I always struggle with these charts from tropicaltidbits.com. You find a link to Tropical Tidbits on the links page. I always struggle with these. I include them in the videos. I digress. For March, we're looking at near normal precipitation, drier than average in the north and wetter than average down to the south. If we have a look at April, that comes out a bit drier than average. So dry and cold, or dry and cool for April. For May, not surprising, with a trough of low pressure over the country, we're coming out wetter than average in May. So a very interesting spring coming up there. If CAN-SIPS is right, we're going to see a milder than average and fairly dry month in March, a colder than average and fairly dry month in April. And then we get through into May and we're looking warm and wet. So every month looking a bit different there. The Beijing Climate Centre is up next. These are the 500 millibar heights from the BCC. So this one shows a trough of low pressure to the north, a ridge down to the south. This is really what we've got through the winter, through the winter, with the jet stream coming through the country rather like that. The temperature anomaly is coming out above average, so a mild spring being seen. There is a strong signal here across all these models for above average temperatures this spring. This is a change on what we saw last month when it was a much more mixed signal for temperatures. Now we've got a very strong signal for a warmer than average spring. And in terms of the precipitation, that looks quite unsettled. Wetter than average in the north, near normal down to the south. We're coming to the end now. So if I look at Jamstack IOD, temperature signal from JAMSTEC is coming out milder than average, only a little bit above average. Most of Europe looking mild, but no signal there for particularly cold weather anywhere. And if you have a look at the precipitation, that's showing near normal, a little bit wetter than average in the east, a little bit drier than average in the west. Quite what sort of pattern would deliver that, I'm not sure, because you would think from that pattern that we'd have a trough just here and a ridge just here, and from that you would think the winds would be going into the north a bit like that, but that can't be the case because the temperatures are looking milder than average. So quite what the JAMSTEC is doing, I'm not sure. It would be lovely to be able to see a sea level pressure or 500 millibar height anomaly from the JAMSTEC model. Unfortunately, we never can do that. We can only look at temperature and precipitation, but quite what the pattern is there, I'm not sure. And then we're going to end with the UK Met Office. This looks very unsettled from our own GLOSY 5 model. So we've got a trough of low pressure centred right over top of the country. This means sea level pressure anomaly. Trough of low pressure right over top of the country, ridge to the south of Greenland. This does look quite a cool and unsettled spring. However, temperatures, well, they're not too bad actually. They're near normal to a little bit above average, below average in the Atlantic, but a little bit above average there. So not a cold spring signal. But the rainfall, that looks pretty awful actually. That's coming out significantly wetter than average. So that's all of the models. That's the 10 of them. And we've had a bit of a change around from last month. Last month, the temperature signal was quite weak and the precipitation signal was quite strong. And they all look quite unsettled for rainfall. Well, things have turned around a bit from that. And now we've got a very strong signal for temperatures with nearly all models. There's a couple that don't, but nearly all of the models that we've looked at coming out with above average temperatures, a very mild spring coming up if these long range models are right. And rainfall is more patchy. Most of them, I think, are still hinting at least at quite an unsettled spring with above average rainfall, more probable than below average. But it's by no means certain, but that's how things are panning out because there is a lot of discrepancy between these models in terms of the rainfall. So we'll wait for the third and final update, which will be with you next month for the definitive look at the spring. But in terms of his second update, most of the models are hinting or forecasting a warmer than average spring with variable rainfall, but probably on the balance of all of the models coming down on the side of being wetter than average. Next month we'll have all 11 models, hopefully, and they will all be covering the spring period. So hopefully we'll be able to add the Russian model to the mix, and the JMA as well will cover the full spring period. So come back for that next month for the final and official forecast from GasWeatherBeats.com for the spring of 2016. Once that's out of the way, we'll be able to really start thinking about summer. Right, that's all for now. Thanks for watching.